to another of the best business minds where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Adrian Kelly, author of the book, The Success Complex: Ancient Wisdom, the Building Blocks of Life, and Your Path to Sustained Success. Adrian, welcome.
How you doing, Mark? Great to be here.
Well, it's just great to have you. And you are in Dublin, Ireland?
Not at the moment. I was a little earlier, but I'm back home now in County Fermanagh, which is just north of the border in Northern Ireland.
Well, it's just great to have you here, and we always enjoy having guests from around the world. Adrian, let's start off before we enter discussions about the book. Tell us about your professional background and how you got to where you're at right now.
Well, I've had a range of careers, Mark. I wasn't the best academic at school. I kind of failed my final set of school exams, actually, for a variety of reasons, and repeated the final year, and did considerably better when I repeated. Then went on and studied a law degree, became a lawyer, as you refer to it in the States, a solicitor here. And I spent 6 years as a criminal solicitor, which I really enjoyed, learned a lot. But then the financial crash happened in 2010, and the first thing to go was a lot of the government subsidies for defense lawyers. And I worked for a private firm, but the money wasn't really there anymore. So I looked for something new, and something new came along quite quickly. I formed a renewable energy company with a friend of mine, and pretty soon we were up and running with some investment money. And over the next number of years, we had 30 staff, and we were selling products around the world, particularly in the States, actually, wind turbines and solar panels. Many would say not enough products, but we did our best. And I stepped back from the company in 2018 and had a decision to make as to whether to go back into private practice or not. But I decided instead to go down the consultancy road and work as a consultant for some large law firms in Dublin and also at the Irish government. And then Brexit came along, and I was a consultant for Brexit for many SMEs, small businesses and medium businesses. And I worked with about 150 businesses over a 2-year period during the uncertainty of Brexit and COVID. And those businesses were mainly based in Northern Ireland and just south of the border. And that was an amazing experience. But interestingly, as careers develop, my interest drifted towards why people were in business, how they ended up there. And a lot of people just weren't very satisfied with where they were in their life, regardless of the money and material success they had in those businesses, large and small. So I began to ask questions and interview people, and I found myself drifting into the more performance psychology field, and thought that there were some key questions that should be asked and perhaps weren't being asked, or certainly weren't available in the mass market out there in terms of the populace. So I decided to write a book, which became The Success Complex. And I'm back at college since then. I'm currently second year of a master's degree, but studying performance psychology. So I've been steeped in the performance psychology end of things for the last 3 or 4 years.
So before we get into that, now that you're looking back on Brexit, was it a smart move for England to do that?
Well, certainly not economically. I can't see any pluses really. I mean, there are various motivations. You could get into that conversation about how people perhaps were missold Brexit as a vote. It probably shouldn't have been a 50% threshold for that vote. It was such a big decision to leave Europe. But it's going to be very, very hard to unwind that decision now. So we just have to live with the consequences.
Yeah, I was over there in England when this was happening, and I couldn't believe it that they would do it. It'd be like Pennsylvania pulling out of the United States and thinking that was a good idea. I just so much, and especially for the young people, because I have older cousins, in their 80s, and they thought it was great. And I'm saying, what about your grandchildren? You basically have ruined their future, because now they can't freely go anywhere in Europe and just work. Now those jobs are going to other people. They didn't really think about that.
No, looking back at it, it seems like more of a protest vote, an anti-establishment vote that carried that through. And unfortunately, people, I don't think, got what they thought they were going to get out of it.
Well, let's start with your book. You start with the Thai cave rescue, and that was I've seen the movie and read all about it. A powerful symbol of collaboration and creativity. What does that event teach us about redefining what's impossible?
Well, I suppose to start with, the book, the title of the book, The Success Complex, is about what complex is barring you from your success. So if you had a complex about heights or small spaces, that would be a complex which impedes you in some way. So I like to ask, what's your success complex, in the sense of what's stopping you achieving your success from a subjective point of view, not from a material or objective point of view, and that comes to defining what success is for you. Um, the structure of the book is really about trying to bring established psychology into the mainstream in a way that's entertaining and interesting. And the first 7 chapters in the book form part one, which are skills you might acquire to overcome challenge. The next 5 chapters are how to apply those skills to, I suppose, sustain achievement in the longer term. And the last 3 chapters about direction. What would we like more of in our lives, and why? So the book starts out, I thought it was a good place to start by imagining the impossible, that concept. And, it sounds elusive. It's a good place to start because you have to imagine before we achieve anything. The Thai cave rescue was a fascinating scenario, obviously a very difficult scenario. There were real people involved, children involved, and there's a real risk to life for those of your listeners that are familiar with the story. So you have a coach, you have 12 or 13 kids trapped in this underground cave that's flooded with water, and they're 4 kilometers from the entrance. And spoiler alert, the essentially they rescue those kids by doing something novel that had never been done before, which was putting them under general anesthetic, treating them as packages, inanimate packages, and using very experienced divers to guide those kids and their coach out of the cave. And it worked successfully. It was incredible. Now, when it was proposed, solutions were proposed, they were being shot down because they all seemed impossible. They had located the kids, and the difficult part was now trying to bring them out. And the 2 guys, John Voltaire and Mr. Stanton, were basically heading for the airport. And one of the Marine sergeants stopped them and said, well, you guys have helped us find the kids. How are we going to get them out? And they said, well, it's impossible. And, he said, well, what does the impossible look like? And I think that's a good place to start this conversation, because quite often we are anchored in what we know. So if we're in business, or if we're in sports, or whatever it might be, our reference point tends to be anchored in our past experience and present experience. And there was a lot of research done on this back in the 70s in a thing called prospect theory. And this was Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman went on to be awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 for his work. And part of prospect theory was this anchoring or adjustment heuristic, where people are fail to adjust adequately, or fail to fail in their predictions or their estimates to get away from what they're anchored to. So if you're stuck on a problem, you're anchored to that problem. And here people were looking at from, they're standing outside a cave, how do we get in, how do we get them out? Whereas if we instead look at a problem where paint the ideal outcome, and chess is very interesting here, and I talk about chess in the book. And in fact, this morning I just had a meeting with Marc Quinn, who features in the book. He's an international chess master, probably one of Ireland's best ever players. And he talks about the magic square in chess. So for a checkmate in chess, usually F7 is the magic square. That's the checkmate square. And he always talks about imagining a checkmate and then deconstructing how to get there. Now, in this instance, with people trapped in a cave, the ideal outcome was to take one kid at a time out of the cave. But it's so stressful being stuck underwater for what would be a 2.5 hour trip, that it would be very, very difficult for a professional diver to manage that person. So they said the only way we could do it is with an inanimate object. So they started there, and then they deconstructed how that would work. And similar to chess, where you're trying to break down a defense in chess, there's usually one piece that holds the whole defense together for your opponent. And it's about eliminating that to secure a checkmate, in simplistic terms.
You mentioned that asking the right question can often unlock the solution. How can people cultivate the habit of asking better questions in their everyday challenges? Because they might not even know what a better question looks like.
Well, and this is kind of a second part to what I just said in a way, because if we have the ideal outcome painted in our minds, which can be the difficult part at times, then it's about asking what if. So, what if we take that obstacle away? What if we address that obstacle and or another obstacle? So it's about defining where you want to go and then looking at the obstacles in the way and taking those apart one by one. In the book, I describe it as casting your mind across a virtual bridge and then re-engineering what that bridge looks like to build it and get there.
You challenge the traditional belief that IQ equals success. What other qualities do you believe truly define human potential? And I agree with you about that.
Yeah, I mean, IQ was never originally designed as a test of intelligence or a measure of potential. In fact, it was designed by Alfred Binet as part of a project related to the French educational system to address shortcomings in education in the French education system in the turn of the 19th century. But it's been latched onto as some sort of gold standard in terms of intelligence or measure of potential. And the difficulty with IQ is it doesn't measure really key things, for example, like creativity, um, like self awareness, like motivation, like adaptability. And these are the key things that make all the difference in the real world when it comes to succeeding in business or in sports for that matter.
I think succeeding in life. I
Yeah.
think that
In life, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
when I'm interviewing students for Vin University, which is that like Harvard, Cambridge for Vietnam, and I interview some kids who have almost perfect board scores, and I'm walk out there unimpressed with them. And then I get a kid who scores less than they do. Maybe it's 13 something or 14 something, but they're so driven and so focused and so disciplined that that's the kid I want in the school, not the kid who almost scored 1600 in their board scores.
Totally. Absolutely.
How
You know,
can someone begin to recognize and develop their own point guard quotient, the less measurable skills that lead to success? Can you explain that?
yeah. So in the book, Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers, which is a book that I love, he kind of analogizes intelligence to the height levels in basketball. You know, if you're really tall, maybe you can dunk a basket, but you're not very skilled in terms of ball handling skills or fitness, whatever else. Typically, if you're 7'4" or whatever. And I took that a step further and I said, well, okay, well, who is the most valuable player on the court? Is it the guy that dunks the basket? Typically, it's the point guard, the guy that's the coach on the court, the guy that calls the plays and it kind of knits the whole defense and attack together. And there's been some examples of quite short players like Anthony Spud Webb, who was 5'7", who played 14 years in the NBA in the 90s. Who was very successful, but not as tall as you would think you need to be a basketball player, like 6'3". So intelligence is something similar. Like I hate using that word intelligence. Let's call it you know our potential possibilities. Our potential, and it can be hard to define and not put people in boxes. And if we extend that basketball analogy, I suppose there's a couple of things that I would see that are very important and people can develop. And one is seeing the game, not just the ball. So if a point guard on the court, he's looking at the game situation. He's looking at what to do at certain times and how to bring people into the game. And I think when it comes to real life scenarios, and I shouldn't just focus on business, real life is about putting ourselves in the shoes of others. It's about listening to our colleagues, listening to customers, listening not just to reply, but listening to learn. I think is such an important thing. Secondly, um, it's the value connection over control. So a point guard on the court isn't somebody that tells people how to do micromanages anything. They're the people that create possibilities and opportunities for the defense and the offense, and they orchestrate that. And I think to be a functioning member of society and to be, hopefully a productive part of an organization, I think it's important to bring other people into play, connect with people, listen carefully to their needs, and try and get the best out of others. And I think that's something we can all do. And something we'll touch a little later on in the conversation, a third thing that I think is so important is for us to stay humble and grounded and allow the space for answers to develop. We don't have to have all the answers.
You use difficult moments in history to explore decision making. What parallels do you see between historical leadership and how modern professionals make choices under pressure? Is it just the technology changes, but people are the same?
Yeah, well, in chapter 3 of the book, I talk about the cornerstone of good decision making. And the cornerstone of good decision making, I argue, is humility. Humility is about not having all the answers, and allowing the space for these answers to develop, as I mentioned in the previous answer. And there's a very interesting, when you mentioned modern executives, the last financial crash in 2008, there was one guy that was quite instrumental in that crash, who worked for AIG at the time, who insured a lot of these credit default swaps. He was a guy called Joseph Cassano, and he was kind of renowned for not listening to the advice of his executives. Now, he was very well paid, but his kind of blindness, or willful blindness, when it came to decision making, really resulted in AIG taking on a lot more risk than they needed to take on, which ultimately drove the whole debt crisis. And for a great book on that, read The Big Short by Michael Lewis, and who really itemizes that out. And the second part of that, I suppose, is I think it's very important not to shoot the message because of the messenger. I do talk about that in the book, where people who have raised the alarm in the past, for example, might be associated with, the boy who cries wolf or whatever. But it's to take ourselves back from that perception and listen to the key facts of the message being given, not the person who's delivering that message. And I do dwell on that point in the book in terms of some stories.
How can humility, as you quote C.S. Lewis, become a cornerstone for stronger, more ethical decision making? So this takes it the next step.
Yeah, I mean, I think stronger and ethical is really about developing the right culture in an organization. And I do talk in the book about it's about a culture develops in terms of what's condoned in a business or organization. So first of all, it's about leading by example. Secondly, it's about educating staff, both in groups and also through um, employee evaluations and reviews. Most people have those usually once a quarter. But there's also, if you can develop the right culture, it's also about holding yourself accountable peer to peer, that people know what's acceptable in any organization. And also creating the space, there's a buzzword, I suppose, out there, which is psychological safety. Creating space for people to feed back, so that management do know what's working and what's not working, and creating a space where people won't suffer critique, and that feedback is received in the way it should be, which is with curiosity and the willingness to change.
Well, when we say lead by example, we always think of that in a positive way. But now there's a lot of leaders, if you follow their example, it's about us and nobody else. So many countries, including the United States, America first. And now you're seeing many countries follow this dictum of our country first and not worrying about your partners around the world. But what's your take on that in terms of leadership, and where will that lead us?
Well, we're always setting an example regardless of what that is. And there's an old saying, which is do as they say, not do as they do. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't work. People do as you do generally. So if we want to create the right culture, it takes work. It's a bit like tending to a garden, so to speak. You've got to sow the right seeds in terms of the environment, and you've got to tend to that culture and every opportunity. I remember giving a talk to a rugby team actually late last year, and just as an example of culture, and this is a performance culture. And there was a young guy came in. He was 20 minutes early. Nobody else was there. I was there preparing for the talk, and the first thing he said to me, "God, there's nobody else here. I'm never going to be this early again." And I said, "Well, do you mind if I use that later in the talk I'm going to give?" So when everybody poured in at 11 o'clock, which was when they were supposed to arrive, they were on the dot at 11. Three people come in late. One guy at 10 past, another guy at quarter past, another guy at 20 past 11. And the guy at 20 past 11 had a coffee in his hand. So obviously he took the time to get the coffee. And I said, the culture that we set in any group organization is set by what we do. And there would be a regression to the mean. So if you've got one guy arriving early who says he'll never be early again, and three guys arriving late, where's the regression to the mean there? And it's up to the management and the leaders in that organization to see that and act on it and make sure that people are rewarded and encouraged to go above and beyond.
Yeah, I work for the largest company in Vietnam, Vingroup. And if you're 5 minutes early, you're actually late. And if you do come on time, you're considered late. You can lose 30% of your salary for a month, 2 months, 3 months, or you can end up losing your bonus for the entire year. And if you're late more than once, you'll be fired. So that they make sure that people are disciplined and on time, and that's how they get their attention. And they're known for these very disciplined, strict habits that they have. And lots of people want their kids to work for them because they feel this is a good environment to become a professional in.
Yeah. Well, if you look at McDonald's, I mean, I worked at McDonald's 20, 30 years ago, and it's probably the same today. The stuff that they train you in and the psychology of it all still stays with me today. Phrases like clean as you go. They condition you into a way of behaving which is efficient and productive. And I think lots of parents would want to see that instilled in their kids.
Yeah, of course. Chapter 4, Atomic Motivation. You explore how motivation can be broken down to its smallest components. What have you discovered about sustaining motivation beyond the initial spark? And we find that with especially a lot of young entrepreneurs, they get excited about an idea, but they don't follow through. How do you get
Mm.
people to do that?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, atomic motivation in this context it really refers to everlasting motivation. And that sounds too good to be true in some ways. There are two types of motivation, broadly speaking. There's extrinsic and intrinsic. So extrinsic is about working for a paycheck or some sort of reward. If I do this, then that will happen, or I will get this. Whereas intrinsic is much more powerful. It's doing things for the sake of doing them in themselves. Now, to think of an example, I can only talk about what I know. I do quite a bit of running, fun running, 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons. And, the hardest part of doing a run is actually getting your runners out and driving down to wherever you're going to run or running from your front door or whatever. But the intrinsic motivation I get is actually the experience of running in itself. I love the freedom of running. I love the headspace it gives me to think about things. And I love the feeling after a run, the feeling of accomplishment, the runner's high. And also, James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits, talks about anchor habits. If we can get one quality health, investment in a day, like a run in or a gym visit, it tends to influence smaller behaviors like eating that little bit better for the rest of the day, or not eating that junk food, or getting a decent night's sleep so you can do it all again the next day. So that for me is a powerful example of intrinsic enjoyment, enjoying something for the sake of it.
Can you share a personal story when you had to rebuild your motivation from the ground up? And I imagine that must have happened during the crash and when there was no money to pay for defense attorneys.
Well, that would be a fair suggestion, but it actually happened for me a little bit before that. When I qualified as a solicitor, I had trained as a conveyancing solicitor, so that was real estate. And I moved into a job and was replacing a solicitor that was qualified for about 7 years, and I was brand new. And this was in defense litigation, and then I moved into the criminal stuff. And I didn't know quite what was happening to me at the time, but it was burnout. And I was working very hard, very stressed, didn't recognize the signs of stress in myself. And ultimately, they manifested in physical signs. That was headaches. I had a hand tremor. I thought I had like a brain tumor or something. And I went and got the scans done. Eventually, I had an MRI done. And it was a relief to find out that all of that was clear and that it was actually stress. And I was amazed at what a physical effect stress can have in your body. But I'm one of the lucky ones because it doesn't always manifest itself in that way. it can be years of stress that builds up and causes serious serious illness like cancer and other things over time.
Uh-huh.
But once I had that experience, I was able to kind of know that I never wanted to go back there again. And I remember leaving the office actually in those early days, and my ear used to be sore because I'd be on the phone all day long, you know. And it took me a long time to get back to actually wanting to speak on the phone as much anymore. It really put me off phone calls. Even today, I try and keep the phone calls short through that experience. But when you say, what did I learn to kind of restart myself? I learned that my body needs recovery. And if you want to perform at anything, if you want to get serious about performance, you got to get serious about recovery. And there's lots of ways of doing that, you know, and there's lots of education out there on that.
All the studies from Harvard, Stanford, Cambridge, all these universities who have studied people's work habits say that you really max out at about 35, 37 hours. This idea of working, having employees work 60, 70 hours a week is detrimental to their health, but you're really not getting anywhere for anywhere. What's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I fully agree. I mean, there's so much we don't know about our bodies, and you know, it's important to invest in that knowledge. You know, somebody said one time, we're born without a care label. You know, you buy a teddy bear, it's got a little label. You know, wash with, you know, don't put it
Yeah.
in the tumble dryer or whatever, it'll shrink. But we're not given that label for ourselves, so we have to learn how to look after ourselves. Now, when we talk about optimum performance, I said if you want to get serious about performance, get serious about recovery, we have to recognize, first of all, our 24-hour cycle. So there will be productive hours of the day. You know, I'm kind of chuckling to myself because I know, Mark, you're in Singapore. It's late at night. You've had a long day. I've been up since 5 a.m. It's now 5 p.m. here in Ireland, and I spent 4 hours in the car. So neither of us are probably at our optimum right now. But I think it's important if we get to know ourselves and get to know when we are in the highest alert phase of the day, we can tailor our work to suit, do the heavy stuff, do the heavy lifting when we've got the energy to do it, and also learn about how to recover. And just to take one example of 24 hours, it's about getting that quality 7 or 8 hours sleep, keep the mobile phones out of the bedroom, um, the blue light to a minimum. And also, if necessary, take naps in the afternoon. I know there's a great book called Sleep, which I read a few years ago. 26 minutes is the optimal nap, you know, and that's called a NASA nap, where they did this testing with pilots, and they found that they were 80% more alert after this short nap in the afternoon. So it's about learning to look after ourselves, learning to recover, and optimizing our performance at a time that we're in a peak condition to do so.
Yeah, I'm actually in Vietnam, but you're so close in the right geography, right?
What
Right
what did
part
I
of the
say?
world.
Singapore? Did I say that?
Yeah, yeah, it's okay. Uh, I myself sleep 5.5 hours, and apparently that's all my body needs. But now when I speak a lot, and when I'm in the car, I automatically close my eyes and take a half an hour to 45-minute nap, and I
Mm,
feel even much more energized
yeah,
than if I sat there in the car reading something.
yeah.
I just listened to a book on tape or music, and I feel so much better. And I think
Well,
that you're right,
yeah.
especially at 64. I want to conserve my energy and be able to maximize it.
Well, and the final point on that, if you drift further apparently than say over 30 minutes, you're into an hour and a half sleep cycle. And if you wake up during that, you feel pretty groggy, you know. So there's an optimum window there to get that short nap in, which is quite powerful.
In chapter 5, you talk about mastery. You emphasize the long road to mastery. How do you define the balance between perfection and progress? And do you look at the Malcolm Gladwell theory of doing something 10,000 times and you become a master at it?
Yeah. So the old 10,000 hour rule, as
Oh, yeah, you
popular,
have that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, as
We
popularized
have
by
the next question. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, as popularized by Malcolm Gladwell. I can jump onto that, or I can tell you. Let me address the perfection versus progress first of all,
Yeah.
which is a there's a lot in that. You know,
Yeah.
usually perfection is a subjective notion. You know, it's something that we aspire to, and you know, there needs to, I suppose, to be a shard of perfection in anything we do. You know, we need to strive towards some goal, but perfection can stifle progress because if we're only interested in perfection, it can be a very elusive thing and can be very demotivating if we don't get it. You know, we always hear this, it's about the, uh, the journey, not the destination. And I think that's very true. But quite often, people set out sometimes on the wrong journey. And that's something we'll probably talk about a little bit later on in terms of the wrong definition of success. I like a thing called horizon goals. And horizon goals are about not about achieving one metric of a success, but about staying there for as long as you possibly can. So if I go back to running, which is always a simple example, if I want to run a personal best 5K, which I think is 22:46 for me, 22 minutes 46 5K. You know, I could bust myself and train it for the next, you know, couple of months and try and beat that. But that wouldn't be the smartest thing to do. It's actually much better to have an horizon goal and say, listen, I'm going to be a 23-minute to 24-minute runner, and I'm going to be that for the next 3 to 6 months. And then I'm going to revise that goal, recalibrate it. And it's a much healthier way to proceed. And you probably will break a PB, by the way, if you're aiming for a window of time, which is slightly under where you hope to achieve, but is much more sustainable. And I think we can do that regardless of what goal we're setting for ourselves. So that's horizon goals. There's a lot of research on that.
And you want to tackle the misconceptions about the 10,000-hour
Yeah,
rule?
yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been well documented. I mean, Anders Ericsson wrote a book called The Making of an Expert back in 1992. He popularized this whole 10,000 hours spent at something makes you an expert, even though he didn't explicitly say that. And he was he'd studied this stuff extensively at the Berlin School of Music, trying to differentiate talent from hard work and which was more important, etc. Malcolm Gladwell, I think it was 2009, published Outliers, and it became like a worldwide conversation. But then Anders Ericsson, back in 2018, wrote another book called Peak, in which he actually addressed the whole 10,000 hours rule to clarify things. And he took issue with Malcolm Gladwell's approach. He said, listen, it's not about 10,000 hours at something. Like, Gladwell used the example of the Beatles playing the guitar in Hamburg, whatever it might be. It's about eliminating bad habits and spending your 10,000 hours at the right thing. So he found that development of expertise is much more about identifying blind spots and weaknesses, working on those through a feedback loop, whether that's yourself, through purposeful practice, as he terms it, or deliberate practice with a coach. So 10,000 hours just spent at something is a misnomer, in my opinion. And as Anders Ericsson ably demonstrates, it's about spending time at the right things which make the real difference, and getting the appropriate feedback loop going to address weaknesses and shortcomings that really makes a difference.
In chapter 6, increasing your luck, you link preparation and mindset with luck. How do you personally create luck in your professional life?
Yeah, well, I like to define luck as opportunity. Luck is happenstance a lot of the time, but in the book I talk about Napoleon creating opportunities in battles, and I talk about a little girl in Belfast, which is a true story, who wanted to win a bicycle, which was in a shop window, and she was a family that didn't have a lot of means, and she set about winning this bicycle, and she does win the bicycle in a draw, and she positioned herself in a way to maximize, you could say, her luck in that situation. And it's worth dwelling on this for a minute or two. So here was a situation where a bicycle, people could enter the draw by shopping at this supermarket. And she discovered that people were discarding their leaflets, their application forms, because they had to enter in, there was a bit of work involved. They had to finish the phrase, shop at crazy prices because. And people who were busy with their shopping didn't always do that. And there was a separate packing area. And she used to find these leaflets lying around the packing area. She was only 10 years old at the time. Herself and her sister, who was 8, used to walk 2 miles a day. And she did it all summer long to enter the draw for this bicycle, and filled out different ends to those phrases and entered the form. She did at least 20 to 30 a day. And she won the bicycle at the end of the summer. And there's a lot in that. There's a lot of skills demonstrated there to create and I suppose avail of opportunity, including observing the opportunity, having the neck to actually take the opportunity and perhaps risk being reprimanded in the store. She wasn't. And also having the creativity to come up with different kind of slogans for those forms, etc., etc. But I think a lot of us in life can learn a lot from that little example of just showing up every day. And is it Woody Allen that said, 80% of winning is showing up or something like that. Well, I firmly believe that, and that's actually a literal example of showing up every day.
I say that to my students, all half of life is just showing up.
Yeah,
I said, you can't get lucky if you don't get off the couch.
that's right.
And if you get off the couch, then there's a good chance that good things are going to happen for you. Rob Lowe, a famous actor, wrote a
Yeah.
book, his autobiography, and he talked about it's about the journey. I think that's true when you're successful, but if
Mm,
you don't see success, especially like in Hollywood, where
mm,
only less than 1% of the people make a living, the journey's not so much fun if
no,
you can't have a positive outcome.
that's right.
So I I think that's easy for somebody when you're successful to say about that.
Well, I love the phrase, and I quote it in the book: "Time doesn't, or opportunity doesn't waste time with the unprepared."
Right. That's right. And
Time does not waste time. Opportunity does not waste time with the unprepared. So people do have all sorts of opportunities from time to time, but there's largely not in the position to avail of them, either because it seems like a lot of hard work, or they haven't developed the skill sets to pounce when the timing's right.
yeah, lots of things can happen, and we see them happen. Wrong place, wrong time, and right place, right time. I mean, I tell my students, I have lots of stories that people just lucked into something great because they were just the right place. One of somebody I knew from Philadelphia, he was going to be a doctor, and his father fixed tractor trailers, and one day his sister was sick. And the father said, "Hey, I need you in the office." He goes, "Dad, this is how I make my money for college, being a caddy." He goes, "I'll pay you whatever you were going to make as a caddy." So he's in there helping his dad out. And his two guys walk in, they're independent truckers, and they want his dad to fix their tractor trailers. And the dad says it'll take 6 to 8 weeks. And they go, "We can't wait 6 to 8 weeks. We need to be able to make a living." So says to him, "Why don't you rent tractor trailers?" But nobody rents them out. So he said, "Dad, what about anybody sell used ones?" And the guys go, "We don't want to buy extra tractor trailers." So he calls the guys who uh, who sell used tractor trailers, asks if I bought two of them, how much would they be? This is 1970 or 1969. And they said, "We'll give you two of them for $1,200. So he asked his dad, "Can you borrow $1,200 to help these guys out?" And he did. Well, he got such a reputation, they changed his major from pre-med to accounting. And when he graduated college in 71, he was making $50,000 a month. And he had 850 trailers that he was renting out. By the time he
Wow.
retired, 25 years later, he sold his company to General GE Private Equity for 350 million because he had 14,500 tractor trailers.
Wow.
He doesn't show that he's not working that day with his dad. He's a general practicing doctor in southern New Jersey.
Incredible.
That's yeah. So I love those. I love those
Indeed.
stories. Is there a story where what seemed like bad luck at first turned out to be a breakthrough moment for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one story I can point is in college. I went and did the certificate in law, which most people do to become a secretary in a solicitor's office. It's a 2-year certificate. I did that, and then it turned out that there was a diploma in law for this was the first year that was available. So I did the diploma in law, which was great. And then there was a 1-year degree, but I didn't get the marks in the diploma to go straight into the degree, which I was really annoyed about. I had to take a year out, but that's actually was the best thing that ever happened to me because I wanted to get relevant work experience because that would help with the application to get back into the degree the next year. So I made. And I made an appointment with 3 different solicitors' offices. It was. I said it's an employment law query, and I think they assumed that I wanted to sue my employer somewhere or whatever. But when I went in, I said, "Well, no, actually, I'm looking for a job, and this is what I can do, etc., etc." I got tossed out of 2 offices and ended up getting the job in the third office. And I worked there for 9 months and got incredible experience. So when I come out of my degree, then I was probably one of the only ones in the class, maybe the only one, who actually had relevant experience in a law firm and walked straight into a job and a good apprenticeship later.
Wow, congratulations on that success.
Thank you.
So, in chapter 7, Never Lose Again, this chapter reframes losing as learning. How has failure shaped your philosophy of success? And really, I think you only learn things from failure. I don't think you ever learn anything from success.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just had this conversation earlier today, actually, with Mark Quinn, the professional chess player I mentioned, and he said one thing that's going out of fashion, Adrian, is that chess players no longer sit down with their opponents and review their games when they lose. They run off out into the corridor, get their phones out or get their laptop out and run it through an engine to see what mistakes they made. He said, but they're missing out on a wealth of information that they could use in new games. I said, what sort of information? Won't a computer give you all the metrics in terms of the missed opportunities and etc.? He said, well, the first thing they'll probably realize is that their opponent sometimes got lucky. Um, sometimes they've completely overestimated their opponent. And sometimes there's insights as to moves they made that their opponent thought they were doing something else, etc., etc. But what tends to happen is it's a very healing experience because, and I love this phrase. He says, because you become part of the win, not just part of your loss. And I love that phrase. I wrote that down this morning when he said to me, you become part of the win. How do you become part of the win? Because you're now learning. You're learning not to repeat those mistakes again. Now, failure in Western society is stigmatized. In America, it's obviously it's not as stigmatized as it is in Ireland or England. But if you're bankrupt in Ireland or England, it's probably just about the worst thing that could happen to you. 20 years ago, it's a little less stigmatized these days. But trying and failing is an incredibly brave thing to do, and it's also one of the most valuable learning experiences we can get, and it's really about trying to see what we can salvage and learn from that situation. There's a phrase I heard lately, and I can't decide whether I like it or not. Failure is fertilizer.
Uh,
sounds like a cheap phrase, but I kind of know what they mean. So we talk about fixed and growth mindsets. Like Carol Dweck has done a lot of this work in
yes.
the US, and a big part of growth mindset is embracing the learning process of failure and reframing what people perceive as failure as actually learning moments.
What practical tools can listeners use to transform setbacks into fuel for growth?
Yeah, well, I think that's really about reframing, which I've just mentioned, which is, you know, people see things in black and white sometimes when it's not a black and white world we live in. And the first step we can do ourselves a big favor by reframing all of these perceived losses or failures. And I talk about chess as opportunities for learning. I'm actually developing an app at the moment with Mark based on performance psychology, and it's not about chess lines or analyzing really good traps in chess or anything like that. It's actually um, it's to facilitate people and make it easy for them to review games that they've lost. And how we do it, there's a spectrum in performance psychology. It's called conscientiousness. So you've got high conscientiousness, people that will actually take the trouble to review their games, and low conscientiousness. And conscientiousness is it's an umbrella term. There can be a number of reasons why you don't want to confront a loss and review a game. And only about 20 to 30% of players actually regularly review their losses in chess. But with this app, what we're trying to do is identify 5 key metrics of why you lost the game, the one key reason. And it's like, I want to design it in a way that's going to be under a minute to input the game you've just lost, let's say, with some notes. And then it's coachable. Then you've got what went wrong, why it went wrong, and then you can send it to somebody like a Mark Quinn who can develop a training program around that. So it's about building a structure to hoover in the learnings of those mistakes or failures, and make you a stronger player. And that's a good analogy for anything in life.
Question from the audience. What is your
Mm.
view on creating a roadmap? Does it have to be based on facts or wishes should be included? Any advice on practical advice on how to create a successful roadmap?
Yeah. Um, well, if the listener wants to tell us a little bit more, is there an industry? Is it sports? Is it business? What kind
Uh,
of roadmap?
Well, let me rephrase the question because I
Mm,
only saw part of it. These days, there's a lot of talking about creating a roadmap for life. Easier done due to so many changes happening in people's lives due to expected and unexpected personal and professional matters. What's your view on having creating a roadmap? Does it have to be based on facts or wishes should be included? Any advice, practical advice on how to create a successful roadmap? So should that roadmap be based on what you want it to be, or should it be based on what's happening to you now and how do you deal with that?
well, any roadmap has to be, you have to have a starting point, and that starting point is now. If we can, if you want to get anywhere, it's about your current circumstances. There's no Irish phrase, it's like, if you're looking for directions and you pull over to the side of the road and the guy says, "Well, I wouldn't have started from here." um, but aside from that, there was a study done a few years ago. I think it was in Harvard, where they questioned MBA students about what plans they had when they left college, when they graduated, and they revisited them 10 years later to see how successful they were. And there was three groups: one group that didn't have a firm plan, second group that had some goals and outcomes, and a third plan who not just had goals and outcomes, but actually had a plan, at least a rough plan. It could always change about how to get there. So they analyzed the groups. Of course, intuitively what you might think did happen, which is the group with no plan, did less well than the other two groups. The group that had goals did much better than the group that had no particular goals. And the group that had goals and a plan, outperformed the rest of the groups by like 10x. So I used to be involved in the businesses, and we had 30 staff. We used to write a business plan a month because, things change all the time. But if you don't have a plan, you don't have anything to change. You don't have a roadmap to tweak and develop and adapt and calibrate. So I would say to the listener, get a plan in place, take some input on it from the trusted advisors, and be ready to tweak, adapt, and calibrate that as you go.
What's practical tools can listeners use to transform setbacks into fuel for growth?
Well, I think documenting. I'm a big believer in journaling. And I was a sports coach last year, high performance coach for quite an elite sports team. I spent a year with the team. And a lot of what I used to encourage the players to do was document what they wanted to get out of a training session. After the training session, document what they got out of, what they need to work on, and do the same for games. And quite quickly, players were identifying common things that were coming up again and again. It could be a fitness level, it could be a bad decision in a game. And it's only through journaling that we can start to um, chart what's working for us and what's not working for us. And then we identify things that are addressable with support, training, and advice. So I hope that helps.
Um, and yeah, in part two of Balance, chapter 8, opportunity balanced with integrity, you talk about integrity as a counterweight to ambition. How do you personally check yourself when success starts to outpace your values?
Yeah, this is we're actually changing the kind of mood music here a little bit, because now we're really talking about mistakes that people make, and these are very talented, hardworking people, typically people that are ambitious and have all the right tools, but just make a wrong turn. And they talk about roadmaps, make a wrong turn at the crossroads, and do something that is not aligned with their morality, and that is just a big mistake. And typically we're talking fraud here or whatever. In the book, I talk about the individual example of Nick Gleason, Barings Bank, and how he lost run of himself, and the bank ended up with an 836 million pound debt, and ultimately Barings, one of the oldest banks, if not the oldest merchant bank in England, went bust as a result of one trader. So
Yeah.
things can snowball. Things can snowball. So we talk about ambition and ambition outpacing, I suppose, our moral judgment. I think we have to think hard about what we're trying to achieve in the first place. There was another great study done a few years back with parrots, and bear with me in this for a second. They wanted to see what the effects isolation have on parrots. So they're in a cage, it's COVID or whatever. They don't see a lot of other parrots. Sometimes parrots pluck their feathers out. They're not eating well. They're not tweeting, whatever it is. So they got 30 parrots and they set up these tablets, and they could tap the tablet at which parrot that they wanted to talk to, chirp to, or whatever. It was a two-step process. They had to ring a bell. Parrots are pretty smart, and they had to tap the iPhone picture, the iPad picture of the parrot that they wanted to speak to. And what they found was the parrot that got the most return calls was the parrot that made the most calls. Interestingly, now that tallies very well with another longitudinal study called the Harvard study, which was developed, started in 1938. Actually, JFK was one of the original participants, President JFK, and they were trying to discover what are the key metrics of success in life and a long and healthy life. And they discovered that the most significant variable at the age of 50 was not cholesterol level, was not our financial level. It was our social fitness. The quality of our social network was the greatest health determinant of the next 20, 30 years, which is very, very interesting. And I think we should all think carefully about that finding when it comes to what ultimately we're trying to achieve or whatever business or enterprise we're involved in. Because ultimately, if we start to compromise, our social fabric, or start to compromise people and trample on people, ultimately it's, we don't win in the long run.
Why do you think so many people compromise their integrity in pursuit of opportunity? Is it greed or what is it?
Well, it's hard to generalize, because studying psychology, one of the subjects I did in first year was understanding personality, which was actually my best subject, as it turns out. Um, the amount of classifications of personality alone, from conscientiousness, neuroticism to perfectionism to narcissism, we're all on spectrums of different personality types. So we're all a mixed bag. And then you couple that in with your life experience, your support network, trusted advisors, whatever else. Suddenly you realize that it's very, very difficult to generalize out of context. So when we talk about integrity, I think I'd have to come back to doing things for the right reasons to begin with, and realizing where there really is value for you. And we know over and over again, it's not simply in the pursuit of material acquisition.
In chapter 9, Collective Opportunity Balanced with Integrity, you examine how a group culture shapes outcomes. What are the signs of a healthy versus toxic collective opportunity? And some of those toxic places are very financially successful, especially uh, in organizations like Wall Street, even legal firms.
Yeah, and again, it's how we define success. Certainly we can achieve financial success by treating people badly, by trampling over people to get what we want. And I'm actually listening to a podcast at the moment about Rupert Murdoch. It's a 4-part kind of mini series, and it's very, very interesting. Because here's an incredibly successful guy from a material perspective. But once you get into the nitty gritty of terms of the things he did to save money uh, in some of his newspapers, and the conditions some of his staff had to work in, it's it really becomes apparent that it was a very narcissistic, lonely type of success. And science and studies have shown us again and again that's not. Now he's 93, 94 and seems to be happy in himself, but it's not generally a great way to proceed if you want a holistic sense of success and health and support in your life.
Hence why he's probably gone through so many marriages.
I suspect so.
How can leaders build cultures that encourage both accountability and compassion?
Yeah, and I suppose this comes back to what we spoke about earlier. Psychological safety is about creating the space where people are not afraid to feedback. And a lot of cultures that are high demand, deadline driven, stressful kind of cultures, they tend to stifle feedback. But as we know, where there's not free flowing information when it comes to what's not working in an organization, those organizations typically don't succeed in the medium to long term. And there are many examples of those. And I talk about examples right from Stalinist Russia to NASA in the book in terms of mistakes that organizations make when it comes to shouting down others when feedback is given, etc. But I would also throw in there what I said earlier, and that is a culture is usually develops um, in terms of what we condone, not necessarily what we say. So it's about tending to that culture, leading by example, and educating our staff to also have peer-to-peer accountability to each other when it comes to I guess upholding those kind of cornerstones of the culture you're trying to build.
Uh, Today, how does AI affect the world that you're in terms of maximizing people's potential and especially a lot of people will try to uh, rig the game, especially students, when it comes to taking tests and improving their skill set. Where's AI fit into the work that you do?
Well, funny enough, in first year in the master's degree last year, one of our lecturers just tackled this issue head on, and I was quite taken aback actually. But when I reflected on it, it made a lot of sense. He said, "Listen, technology changes all the time. Um, when we had word processors and spell correct, that enhanced people's skill sets and made them more efficient and faster. Now we've what's called essentially narrow-based AI, which are tools to enhance what we can contribute to the world. I think the real danger comes in academics and other fields where we switch off our brains. But if we can use any new technology in a way that enhances what we're trying to do, and we ensure that it's fact checked, that it's authentic, that it comes from the right place and tries to deliver the right result you're trying to achieve, I don't see a whole lot wrong with that, to be perfectly honest.
Um,
Now,
Going for
can I just add to that
yeah,
the whole
yeah, yeah,
prospect
of course.
of the whole prospect of general AI, this whole race to create a version which is like 1,000 times more intelligent than the human race, etc., etc. That's pretty scary. That stuff. But
And
the tools of AI can certainly enhance our lives in a number of ways. I think.
I think people have underestimated what this is going to do, that science fiction writers have had it right all along.
Yeah.
Uh, the only thing I say to my students is that you can think abstractly, you can come up with creative ideas that don't necessarily going to come up with AI unless you feed it a lot of information
Yeah.
and help it make those connections. But um, that's the only edge that you have right now.
Yeah, I mean, one good way is to allow it to help you interrogate information. So you might have a study or something that's quite or a number of studies. You can upload those and ask it various questions, and then and then look for where it's referenced. Then read the document yourself and go back to it and stuff. It can speed up research and it can speed up getting to the right information quickly, which is quite helpful.
Here's my last question for you. How does transcendence change the way we view achievement, not just as individuals, but as part of something greater? So if you can explain first what that is and then
Absolutely.
answer the question.
Well, it's a great place to finish our conversation. Transcendence is really revolves around Maslow's theory. So, anybody that's studied any sort of business related course has studied Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. Is this pyramid where you start with these basic hygiene needs, food, shelter, etc. Then you build, it goes to need, esteem, etc. And then the top of that pyramid is actualization, self-actualization, which in the early 1940s, Maslow had proffered as the ultimate in what a human can be, self-actualized, being everything you can be. However, just prior to his death, he said, "You know what? I may have got it wrong. Self-actualization is actually not the top of the pyramid. Self-transcendence is." Self-transcendence in what we can do for others, what we can do for the human race, how we can bring others on is ultimately the best thing we can do for ourselves. Now, in the book, I actually refer to Chris McKindless, and any of you have seen that great movie Into the Wild. It was directed by Sean Penn, where he's a student, he's offered a summer, he tries to cut himself off from society. He ends up moving to the wilderness of Alaska and living in an old school bus, and sadly gets trapped there, ultimately dies there. Spoiler alert, sorry for ruining the movie and the book, but his final entry in his journal, which was found after his death, I actually finished the book on, which is this quote, and he says, happiness is not real unless shared. He spent all of this time trying to cut himself off from society, and he realized that when he had spent time, in the bliss of nature and getting back to nature, it doesn't tend to be real unless we can experience it with others. It's what we can do for others. And I end the book on the note, well, similarly, success is not real unless shared. Now, if you look at the world in the way it is at the moment, and over the last 10 years, it seems to have got a lot more hostile and a lot more zero sum. It's about hate. It's about destroying your opponents. It's about, it's about winning at all costs. Uh, is it though? I mean, we live on this small planet. We're not going anywhere anytime soon. And the sooner we can learn as a human race to start working together, to start winning together, that's for me is the only true type of success, because any sort of victory over somebody else, a zero sum win, is only ever a short term win. Because if somebody else loses, all of us ultimately lose in some way.
Thank you so much for taking the time with us. I'm sure everybody just enjoyed listening to just your accent alone talk about these subjects. It was just wonderful to hear you, and the book was terrific, and one that gives you a lot of thought about how you're managing your own life on a day-to-day basis. So I really enjoyed the book,
Well,
and
thank you,
I
Mark.
hope
And it's
others
been a
will as
pleasure.
well.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. And thanks for taking the time.
And I hope you'll come out with another book so we can have you back again.
Well, I'm working on it. Watch this space.
Well, everybody, have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you all next week. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you, Mark.